Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Let's begin with the keywords that made headlines this week. 2 days of early voting took place on Thursday and Friday. Now ballot boxes will be monitored around the clock until the actual election day. South Korea's central bank cut its policy rate to 2.5% as part of efforts to shore up the sluggish economy. Over 600 days have passed since the Gaza war broke out, leaving more than 54,000 Palestinians dead. Food boxes have finally been distributed to Palestinians in desperate need of nutrition starting Tuesday. Voters in South Korea headed to polling stations 5 days earlier than the June 3rd election day on Thursday and Friday for 2 days of early voting. South Korea is now in a so-called blackout period as opinion polls are banned from 6 days before the day of the election. Our An Sung-jin starts us off.
One line became two, even three-folded with voters who'd queued up for early voting.
From 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Thursday and Friday, more than 3,500 early voting stations nationwide, including this one in Yeoksamdong, Gangnam-gu District, Seoul, were open.
Starting from early morning until the last minute before the last day of early voting closed, people continue to show up to cast their ballots ahead of next Tuesday's presidential election.
I came here with my son to explain about how elections work and that this many people are interested in voting.
People nowadays say how living conditions are difficult, so I hope that the economy can be revitalized and that whichever candidate wins, they actually follow through with their election promises.
As someone who is job hunting, I hope there will be more support related to employment.
The first day of early voting saw record high figures since 2014 when it first took place in national elections. However, the total early voter turnout rate for this presidential election stood at 34.74%, 2.16 percentage points lower than the previous one, marking the second highest figure. Jeollanam-do province recorded the highest turnout at 56.5%, while Daegu the lowest at 25.63%. The capital's Seoul stood at 34.28%. Voting for the 21st presidential election is scheduled for June 3rd from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Voters must be over 18 and bring a government-issued ID. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And with the actual election day drawing closer, the main presidential runners went all out to garner last-minute support from the public. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung spent all day Friday in Gangwon-do and Chungcheong-do provinces. Our campaign correspondent Shin-ayoung reports.
Marking the last day of early voting, the Democratic Party on Friday gave it their all, this time with its candidate focusing on regions outside the capital. On the final day of early voting, Lee Jae-myung chose Gangwon-do province, known for its biohealth industry, as his rally location for the first time during the official campaign period. During his visit to the city of Wonju, which the party describes as home to public bio and medical institutions, he emphasized the need to support the region in a way that aligns with its specialty.
Wonju is known for its focus on the medical industry. We should continue to support it as much as possible under the existing policies.
On Friday, he pointed to reviving the domestic economy as the top priority after the election.
The most urgent priority is to revive the domestic economy. Since the current extra budget is too small, the focus should be on expanding it.
Meanwhile, regarding Thursday's record-high early voting turnout, the DP said it was a clear reminder that votes are more powerful than bullets. The party attributed the high turnout to the public's strong desire to end the insurrection fallout and put the country back on track.
In the 2022 presidential election, early voting turnout hit a record high of 36.9%. Let's break that record again today. By taking part in early voting, you can help end the insurrection, restore livelihoods, and bring the country back together.
The party said that it will stay humble and focus on the people's wish for a change in government. Shin-ayoung, Arirang News, Wonju.
And People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo on Friday hopped on a 90-hour non-stop overnight campaign, where he's campaigning across the nation until the end of the campaign period without returning home. Our Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
Covering as much ground as possible is People Power Party presidential candidate Kim Moon-soo's last-minute push strategy. On Friday, he took off for a 90-hour trail without going home. And as he was about to meet as many voters as possible, he started off with a long plea for votes.
The People Power Party has had many shortcomings. I deeply reflect on and sincerely apologize for having disappointed the people. We deserve the criticism and we will reflect on it deeply. We will not shy away from self-sacrifice, making tough decisions for the greater good, and pursuing policy innovation.
For this first day of the marathon, Kim rallied in Gyeonggi-do Province and Chungcheongbuk-do Province before wrapping it up in Gangwon-do Province. With the voters already casting their ballots, he's not trying to put in new messages against his rival, but has been reiterating that Lee Jae-myung has too many legal risks and that DP will have too much power if it wins the presidency as well. To add to the efforts, Kim also has been appearing on stage with some well-known liberal politicians such as Son Hak-kyu and Chun Byung-won, who formed their own factions as anti-Lee Jae-myung. As for the high voter turnout in early voting, the party claimed the credit, saying the number reflects anti-Lee Jae-myung sentiment and that it's also a signal that things are turning around.
I believe this high voter turnout reflects the people's strong and resolute will to stop a monstrous dictatorship. We are moving toward a miraculous comeback.
As for the second day of his journey, on Saturday, Kim is set to tour around Gangwon-do Province a bit more and head down to Gyeongsangbuk-do for rallies over the weekend. The Gyeongsangbuk-do region, including Daegu, is a region that has not participated in early voting as much as others. Having said that, it also means that many votes are up for grabs still in the conservative stronghold. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, Wonju.
With just days to go before South Koreans vote for their next president, foreign policy may not be dominating the headlines at home, but globally, there is a growing interest in how the next president will navigate the complex dynamics on the Korean peninsula. For that, we have our correspondent Kim Jung-sil here in the studio. Welcome back, Jung-sil. Jung-sil, hasn't been a busy week for you this week.
Thanks for having me, Tami. And yes, it has been super busy with the election just around the corner. Tensions are rising fast. And at this point, every word is making headlines that are coming from the candidates, especially after that final televised debate.
And you've been closely following foreign policy platforms. Now, let's start with Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung. What is his vision for the country on the world stage?
Yes, Lee laid out a vision that emphasizes balance, practicality, and peace through strength. He opened by referencing the aftermath of the December 3rd martial law unrest, saying the country is facing a serious diplomatic vacuum. He warned that South Korea is under growing external pressure from U.S. protectionism to increased military moves by China and Russia, and Moscow's deepening ties with Pyongyang, and said diplomacy needs to catch up.
The U.S. alliance is the foundation of our foreign policy. It must be developed practically, inclusively, and with a long-term vision. But we must not neglect ties with China and Russia. They require careful, strategic management.
In his written foreign policy platform released earlier this week, Lee signaled a shift from the North Korea policies of past progressive administrations. Rather than demanding full denuclearization up front, he called for step-by-step progress and practical engagement, likely shaped by uncertainty over U.S. policy under President Trump.
Now, let's go over People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo. How did he frame his approach to North Korea and regional security?
The People Power Party candidate drew a hard line, especially in security, in sharp contrast to Lee Jae-myung. He argued that diplomacy begins with strength and warned that the North Korean regime continues to pose an existential threat.
Kim Jong-un's dictatorship threatens our lives and property with nuclear weapons and missile provocations. I will build a transparent, principled inter-Korean relationship and strengthen our defenses by reinforcing nuclear deterrence through the US alliance.
And we got this directly from the campaign. Kim is calling for a principled approach to North Korea, grounded in South Korea's constitutional claim to a single Korean state. He criticized past administrations for inconsistent responses to provocations and says it's time for a clear, rule-based policy, which isn't far from the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's approach. Kim proposed economic and mutually beneficial projects such as cultural, sports, and humanitarian exchanges to create shared values, and said he's open to meeting with the North Korean leader.
Jung-seo, last but not least, what did we hear from Reform Party's Lee Jun-suk? He hasn't been exactly a foreign policy heavyweight until now.
Well, this was one of the first times that he clearly outlined his foreign policies, and he leaned into his international background and non-ideological approach.
The president of South Korea must have international experience and a practical mindset. If elected, I will merge the unification and foreign ministries and appoint a deputy prime minister for national security to oversee foreign affairs, unification, and defense policies.
He promised to scrap the current structure entirely and recenter South Korea as a strategic architect and not just dependent on the alliance. 3 candidates, 3 foreign policy visions, and with the clock ticking, the next president will set the course for South Korea's role in the global stage.
Fascinating indeed and high stakes. Jung-seo, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure, Tammy.
The Bank of Korea on Thursday decided to lower its key lending rate to boost the local economy, and it also lowered its growth projection for this year. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea's central bank has lowered its interest rate by 25 basis points as widely expected, bringing it down to 2.5%. The Bank of Korea on Thursday announced a rate cut following the 4th Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year, citing concerns about sluggish economic growth.
With inflation continuing to ease and growth expected to slow significantly, the Bank of Korea said it judged an additional rate cut appropriate to help ease downward pressure on the economy. The decision was unanimous among Monetary Policy Board members.
The decision comes after the central bank left rates unchanged in January and April and lowered them in February. The decision to slash rates was mainly driven by concerns over weak growth, with domestic demand weighed down by sluggish consumption and a downturn in construction investment. South Korea's economy contracted in the first quarter, shrinking by 0.2% on quarter, a sharp downturn from the central bank's February forecast of 0.2% growth.
Domestic demand has remained weak nowadays, and also overall consumer sentiment remains subdued nowadays. But although experts have shown signs of improvement nowadays, it's clear that without a rebound in domestic demand, economic recovery will be difficult in the short term.
The BOK also slashes GDP growth forecast for this year to 0.8% from 1.5% in its latest economic outlook report, which is released 4 times a year in February, May, August, and November. This mirrors a downgrade by the state-run Korea Development Institute and major global investment banks, all also projecting just 0.8% growth as of late April. The central bank's projection for 2026 was also lowered to 1.6%, but the outlook for this year's consumer price inflation was maintained at 1.9%. The Monetary Policy Committee also had room to cut rates as the Korean won has strengthened to the 1,300 range against the greenback after nearing the 1,500 mark and forcing the committee to hold rates steady last month. But the move widens the rate gap with the U.S. to 2 percentage points, raising concerns over capital outflow and whether more cuts could fuel home prices and household debt without lifting growth. And that's why the Bank of Korea is emphasizing that while it's open to further rate cuts to support growth, it will closely monitor both global and domestic conditions before deciding on the timing of its next move. 이수진, Arirang News.
Consumer sentiment here in South Korea saw a sharp rise in May. A temporary pause in U.S. tariffs and expectations for the new South Korean administration helped pull up the consumer confidence. Park Jun-han reports.
South Korea's consumer sentiment in May saw its largest increase in 4 years and 7 months. The Bank of Korea released on Tuesday the country's Composite Consumer Sentiment Index, which reflects consumers' views on the state of the economy. Rising by 8 points from April's 93.8 to 101.8 in May, the index recorded its strongest one-month gain since October 2020. A CCSI above 100 indicates optimistic consumer sentiment compared to the average of the last 20 years. For the past 5 months, the index has remained below 100. However, as the index in May surpassed 100, it signaled a shift from pessimism to optimism. The index's 6 elements, including current living standards and prospective household spending, all saw a rise in May, with prospective domestic economic conditions rising by 18 points compared to last month. Among the various components, several indicators pointed to a rise in optimism. This shift is likely tied to the 90-day suspension of reciprocal U.S. tariffs that helped ease some concerns over global trade uncertainty. Also, expectations surrounding the new administration's economic policies after the upcoming election, along with anticipated progress in South Korea-U.S. tariff negotiations, contributed to the boost in consumer confidence.
The domestic political uncertainty will be resolved with the presidential election on June 3rd. It's also true that the tariffs aren't as severe as they were initially stated.
Meanwhile, prospective housing prices in May recorded 111, 3 points higher than last month. The outlook for housing prices has been rising for 3 straight months, as more people expect further increases due to continued apartment price hikes in the metropolitan area. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
And on the demographic front, more babies were born in March and more marriages were noted as well, contributing to a sharp increase in the latest quarterly number of births. Our Moon Ji-young covers the numbers.
The number of newborns in the first quarter of this year recorded its highest in 3 years, driven by increased marriages and improved perceptions of childbirth. Data from Statistics Korea on Wednesday shows that a total of 21,041 babies were born in March this year, marking a 6.8% year-on-year increase. This represents the 9th consecutive month of growth and marks the first time in 10 years that March birth figures have increased compared to the previous year.
Last year, people started having babies again, having delayed doing so during the pandemic, and now it seems this is continuing this year. Additionally, we're seeing births from couples who married 2 years ago and last year being added to this trend.
The number of marriages also continued to climb, with 19,181 couples tying the knot in March, marking an 11.5% increase from the previous year. This marks the 12th consecutive month of growth, the longest upward streak since record-keeping began, and its highest level in 6 years. Some experts attribute this increase to changes in individual perceptions of marriage.
Even just 5 or 10 years ago, there were many times when marriage was viewed as something not very cool. There were also many extremely negative perspectives about it. But these days, it's true that those views have softened significantly.
Meanwhile, the number of divorces dropped by 3.2% from a year earlier. The country's total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have during her lifetime, also edged up. It came in at 0.77, up 0.04 from a year earlier, with gains seen across all age groups from women aged 24 and under to those in their 40s and beyond. Despite the rise in births and marriages, the country continues to face a natural population decline. With 31,141 deaths reported in March, a 0.2% increase year-on-year, the population contracted by 10,100 individuals. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
This past Tuesday marked 600 days since the October 7 attack by Hamas, which triggered massive Israeli military offensives in Gaza. With no signs of a ceasefire, civilians in the devastated Gaza Strip are suffering from a lack of food and health care. On Tuesday, following almost 3 months of aid being blocked, the U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distributed around 8,000 food boxes, or around 462,000 meals in the southern city of Rafah.
We want to eat, we're hungry, we have been humiliated with the communal kitchens and the water and everything. Look what they've put for us.
Nearly 2 years into the conflict, more than 54,000 people have been killed and over 123,000 injured. Gazans still suffer from severe food shortages and a lack of access to healthcare in the devastated enclave. 600 days ago, on October 7, 2023, Hamas attacked Israel, killing more than 1,000 and kidnapping more than 200 people. That led to a massive Israeli military offensives, airstrikes, and a ground invasion of Gaza. Though ceasefire negotiations continue with mediators including the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt, a deal has yet to be reached. Economists and diplomatic experts have gathered on South Korea's southern Jeju Island for an international peace forum this week, where growing uncertainty over Trump's trade policies were at the center of discussion. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji was there.
Experts are now warning that U.S. President Donald Trump's economic policies could have conflicting consequences that do not necessarily promote economic growth or increase productivity in the country's economy. Speaking on Thursday at an international peace forum held on Jeju Island, Jeffrey Schott, a senior fellow from Peterson Institute for International Economics, said uncertainty about the size and duration of tariffs will discourage or delay investment decisions.
And so the climate is even more uncertain, and uncertainty is a tax on doing business. That's a lesson in economics that I think the Trump administration is only now beginning to learn.
South Korea, which faces 25% U.S. reciprocal tariffs, has been seeking a trade deal with the Trump administration before the July 8th deadline, when the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is lifted. Scott Snyder, the head of the Korea Economic Institute of America, who's also at the Jeju Forum, explained there will be a series of deals, adding that although the current focus is on tariffs, there will be another negotiation on security.
I would say deal by deal. Deal by deal. And I think that is going to go on maybe for the entire Trump administration. New things will pop up. They will require negotiation. And so I think that's what will happen, and I think it will be ongoing. It will be stressful. But I think that until both sides come to a place where they're satisfied with everything, President Trump's style is to want to make deals. But I don't believe that it's going to be one big, beautiful deal.
He suggested it would be important for the Korean government to have negotiation strategies to make sure that what Trump is trying to do is perceived as too costly. He also noted that shipbuilding is clearly an area where South Korea has a set of technologies that the U.S. is in need of. Amid more uncertainty over Trump's tariff policies, especially following the latest decision from the U.S. Trade Court, eyes are now on how the trade negotiations between Seoul and Washington will play out. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News, Jeju.
The prehistoric rock art along the Banggucheon stream in Korea's Ulsan is set to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The rock art, or petroglyphs, including the Banggude rock art, which depicts various animals as well as humans hunting and cutting up whales. Meanwhile, the Cheonjeonri rock stands out for its geometric symbols. The Korea Heritage Service announced on Monday that ICOMOS, an organization which evaluates cultural properties for UNESCO, has recommended the site for listing. Now, the inclusion on the list is expected in July, making it South Korea's 17th World Heritage Site. That is all we have for this weekend. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy your weekend wherever you are.